timer. I'm assuming as soon as the timer runs out, we'll be live. But I'm not sure. It does say live, huh?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this live keynote from Vuejs Amsterdam 2021. I'm super excited to welcome you here. It's really happening. Like we are live now. We see you in the chat. I would like to start by really quickly welcoming my co-MCs, Maria Lamardo and Gift. How are you today?
Hey
Hi.
everyone.
Excited
Hi.
as well. Well, we have the man himself, Evan Yu. Hi, Evan. How are you?
Hello.
We're
Good.
so excited to have you here for your address, State of the Union 2021. We have been super excited to have you every year in our conference, and this is no exception. The stage is different this year. We're not at Theater Amsterdam, but we have a distributed stage now with this virtual venue and all our wonderful audience in YouTube and hoping seeing this simultaneously. So, well, hello to everybody watching. Um, we're really excited. We're going to be right after your address to address some of the questions from the audience. So,
hmm
well, we're excited to see what you're going to be talking to us about, the state of view, what's next. And without any further ado, here you have it. Evan, you.
All right. So let me share my screen. Okay, let's see. Can everyone see it? Yeah. All right. So, so I still remember we did this live in person last year. It's really a pity that I have to do it remotely here. I really wish I could come to Amsterdam in person, but alas, this is where we are. So today I'm going to again give this State of Union talk, mostly just to give everyone a broad sense of what's been going on and what we are thinking about, what we've been doing, and what we plan to do next. Um, First of all, some brief updates. We're now at over 1.5 million plus weekly active users. This is data collected from our Chrome DevTools extension, which is probably the most accurate proxy of actual users that's using Vue.js. And we are at over 9 million plus NPM downloads per month. Um, so again, this is compared to last year's data. I believe we doubled again in the number. So I am still honestly pretty in awe that we can still keep this kind of growth. I, I think this is so considering Vue was published in 2014. This is like the seventh year, and it's just it still amazes me that we're still seeing more new users starting to use Vue every day. Some exciting stuff. Vue is powering NASA applications that's flying uh, machines to Mars. So I don't think this is actually news, but honestly, I didn't realize this that Vue is actually powering some of these interfaces. There are two projects. F Prime, I believe, is the application that is used for flight controlling these sending stuff to Mars, and OpenMCT is also another mission control interface. Um, both using Vue. Pretty exciting. Okay, so the biggest thing happened for Vue in 2020 is obviously the release of 3.0. We worked on this for a very, very long time, and there are tons of improvements. And I believe everyone already, have heard enough about Vue 3. So I'm not going to go into what's in there. Many of you probably are already using it. So but what's been going on after Vue 3's release? So obviously, because Vue 3 is such a huge release, there we intentionally planned to do the release in a way that we don't want we don't want to force everyone to upgrade all at once, right? So Vue 3 still needs some time for stabilization. In particular, we want to give the ecosystem the time to catch up, because that is the main blocking points for most users to upgrade. So in the meanwhile, we've been doing some DX explorations. So DX stands for development experience. We are thinking about, given the new foundation, what can we provide? How can we imagine some of the with the emergence of new APIs and new browser capabilities, new tools that's coming up in the ecosystem, what can we leverage to rethink what the future Vue development experience could be like? So we've been doing some of that. In other news, Vue Router 4 is now stable thanks to the hard work by Eduardo. Hooray. Vue X4 is also now stable thanks to the hard work by Kia. So you're gonna probably hear more from them about the respective projects later in talks, but just want to hand out a big shout out to our team members for working and maintaining these libraries. And these are definitely no easy job making these libraries to be fully compatible, given over the years we've accumulated so much knowledge and compatibility and bug fixes. Trying to keep everything consistent and work the same way for Vue 3 is definitely no easy job. And other great news, the ecosystem is really catching up now, right? You're probably going to hear from many of these projects at this conference. We are going to hear great news about Nuxt 3. We're going to hear great news about Vuetify and Quasar for Vue 3 support. And if you've been using component libraries like Element or InDesign Vue, they also now have fully Vue 3 compatible versions. So if you're starting a new project, now you have a lot more tools at your disposal with Vue 3. Okay, so now going into the exploring the future of Vue.dx part, I think there are three major aspects that we've been looking at. The first is build tools. The second is the authoring experience. And the third is IDE support. So if we look at the history of Vue, it started out as purely a runtime library. But today, Vue is a framework, right? We are no longer referring to Vue as just a library, because Vue is a framework that is supposed to provide a cohesive and a comprehensive and cohesive development experience. So that would inevitably include a streamlined experience when you're building an application, right? The three things that we mentioned here are quintessential. Modern development is hard to do without build tools. Even though Vue still supports being included in a pure HTML page with just a single script tag, the vast majority of non-trivial apps today are built with build tools. So this constitutes a large chunk of the development experience in our day-to-day work, right? I believe if you've worked on a app of decent size, you've definitely experienced having to wait for seconds or even up to minutes to spin up a new dev server, and waiting for several seconds for a save, an edit to be reflected in the browser, right? In many ways, we can say, okay, this is the problem of the build tool ecosystem, right? That's a Webpack problem. That's a Tool X problem. And say it's not a part of the Vue framework's concern. We can obviously say that, but but at the same time, personally for me, I am a Vue user as well. And every time I'm trying to spin up a Webpack-based Vue project, I have to go through the process of installing hundreds of megabytes of dependencies, and then having to wait several seconds for a project to start up. And I really just as from a developer perspective myself, I really miss the days where I could just open up an index.html, drop some code in it, and see it instantly start up, and see it instantly reflect any changes I make. I really miss that experience. But I also know if I'm just using, if I'm building something that's, oriented for production, eventually I'll have to introduce build tools. And then all these build tools related problems will inevitably sink in. So it seems to me the only logical conclusion is to figure out how to make things fast. Maybe building a build tools of my own, which is how I started building Vue in the first place, right? So many of you have probably know for the past few months, I've been working on this new build tool called Vite. So Vite is the French word for fast. So it's not called Vite, it's called Vite. Vite is a new tool. So Vite initially started as this idea of me wanting to be able to write code that says import foo.view directly in the browser and see it just work. Right. So the idea started actually in 2019. So that's more than 2 years, almost 2 years ago. I experimented with this idea. At that time, native ES modules imports has just landed experimentally in a few relatively new browsers. So I was experimenting with it and got a proof of concept working. It's called Vue Dev Server. It's now archived, but you can still find it. So the initial idea was pretty exciting, but soon I realized I need to actually add all these new additional features that we are so accustomed to in Vue CLI. For example, how do we work with preprocessors? How do we import NPM dependencies? How do we get hot module replacement, right? So all of these problems seems pretty hard at that time, and Vue 3 was also not finished at that point. So I decided to put it aside and focus on Vue 3. Now, after Vue 3 was released, I finally got some time to come back to this idea. And after some experimentation, I finally figured out how to do hot module replacement over native ES modules. And that kind of kicked off the second wave development for Vite. So we got Vite close. So the second iteration of Vite, I would call Vite 1, came about that was before Vue 3 was released, right? So I did some further exploration, and essentially I used Vite 1 as a testbed for the new single file component compiler toolchain for Vue 3, because it was lighter weight and we didn't have to go through the full Webpack implementation again. We didn't have to complicate the Vue CLI setup while I was quickly iterating over the ideas. But Vite 1 has some limitations. So in the past 2 months, we came to the conclusion that Vite could be much more than just an experimental thing. It could be the real thing. It could be the real thing that gives you a significantly better tooling experience. And that is what we decided to do. So if you haven't tried Vite or heard about Vite, I believe this is going to be the best possible way for you to start trying Vue 3 and the modern VX that we have imagined of how future Vue development will feel like. There are already a pretty vibrant community around Vite, and there are integrations if you are primarily working with backend frameworks like Rails or Laravel. There are already tools that allows you to use Vite in there, but you can also use Vite as a standalone Vue CLI equivalent for building SPAs. Now, you'll probably ask, what will the relationship between Vue and Vue CLI be? Now, so I want to dig a bit into the scope of Vite as a tool. Now, Vite is pretty opinionated. It includes both the dev server and the build tool. It uses rollup under the hood and packs a lot of these familiar pre-configured features that we are familiar in Vue CLI. For example, it resolves node modules. It can support CSS preprocessors. It supports importing Vue files via plugins. So it supports importing a file to get its asset URL. So via the Vue plugin, most of the common source code experience will be very similar to Vue CLI. The main difference is in terms of scope. Vue CLI is obviously more Vue focused. At the same time, Vue CLI also gives you this sort of code scaffolding capability where you can have a code base and you install a Vue CLI plugin that allows it to modify the existing project to add a new feature. Now, the scaffolding and plugging extension part is intentionally not within scope of Vite, right? Vite is also designed to be framework agnostic because we want the internal mechanism to be robust without to be too coupled to Vue. Now, in fact, many other users of other frameworks have been using Vite happily, and they're really glad that this can be actually reused across frameworks. So with this in mind, the long-term relationship, in the short term, I believe Vite and Vue CLI will still coexist. If you are on a Vue CLI app, migrating to Vite kind of has to do with how much Vue CLI specific features that you are using. If you are not using any extremely coupled idioms or conventions extremely coupled to Vue CLI, mostly has to do with Webpack because Vue CLI is Webpack based. So if you're using a lot of Webpack specific plugins or third-party extensions with a Vue CLI app, it'll probably be more difficult. However, if you're just using an out-of-the-box default Vue CLI convention, Vue CLI configuration, it will actually be pretty straightforward to migrate to Vite. There are just a small, pretty minor semantic differences. Now, in the long run, obviously, we want to converge the recommended Vue tooling. Again, right? I think in a lot of ways, we kind of have to follow this explore first without history burdens. Then we can figure out how we can then reconverge this into this improved and better default experience. Now, so there are different ways to do this. And to be honest, we're not 100% sure on how we would want to do it because we're still figuring it out. But one thing for sure is the future review tooling will have the speed of Vite. Vite is insanely fast because it leverages native ESM modules. It leverages compiled to native tools like ESBuild. So from my personal experience, some apps that would require more than 30 seconds to start with Webpack or Rollup, these bundler-based setups, now typically starts within 1 second or one or 2 seconds with a Vite-based setup. So I believe this kind of speed improvement is so significant that it is worth rethinking how the whole tooling landscape should work. But we also don't want to drop this sort of comprehensive support of Vue CLI. In particular, knowing that if you follow the default recommended Vue tooling path, you'll get first-class support for testing of Vue components with popular test runners. So this is something we'll definitely think about, how to best combine the good parts of Vue CLI and the good parts of Vite. Now, it could be in the form of a new version of Vue CLI that uses Vite under the hood. It could be in the form of an alternative tool that's essentially a more opinionated Vue-specific scaffold or template built on top of Vite. We're not sure, but we believe either way, in the short near future, expect to see something that combines the best parts of both. Okay, so authoring experience. So we've been thinking about composition API, and for a lot of users, the experience of authoring composition API, especially inside single file components, can be a bit more verbose and cumbersome. So we learned a lot about we learned a lot from some of the other newer upcoming frameworks like Svelte, and found that we can actually come up with a way that drastically simplify composition API usage in single file components, and that is the script setup RFC. If you haven't been following along, check it out in our RFC repo. So just search for script setup on GitHub/Vue.js/RFCs. And I personally believe this will provide a pretty good DX jump if you are using composition API with single file components. And the challenge is how to provide a good IDE experience for that, which I'll talk about in a second. We're also experimenting with style variable injections. So it gives you the capability close to how you can dynamically link your JavaScript state with your CSS. So partially giving you the capability similar to CSS in JS, but still writing familiar CSS inside style tags in your single file components. And this is a purely additive feature as well. And then this controversial ref sugar thing. So I put it out as sort of thought provoker, right? I didn't put it out with the intention saying this is going to be the way of doing the things. And we received a lot of pretty enthusiastic feedback, right? So this is one of those features, kind of like when Composition API first came out, people would have strong opinions with. And to be honest, I'm happy to have my mind changed. And over time, I think the major challenge of ref sugar is that, yes, it sort of brings some unnecessary challenge in terms of IDE support. And there could be better ways of doing it. So I have new ideas that would achieve something similar to ref sugar, the syntax simplification, but without the sort of introducing non-standard JavaScript syntax drawbacks. And the best part is we can probably get the syntax benefits without having to introduce complicated, dedicated IDE support hacks for that. So stay tuned. And now IDE support, right? I think for a very long time, people have been happy with Vite, but one of the major trends that we are seeing in recent times, and in particular with V3 giving better TypeScript support, is that more and more users are expecting to have comprehensive type checking, IntelliSense, and refactoring support for single file components, right? Up to a certain point, I think up to say back to from 2 years ago, we kind of just say, okay, single file components is its own thing. So many of the features that you'd expect to work in TypeScript, we just don't expect it to work in single file components. But in the meanwhile, we're coming to see that the authoring experience with TSX is great because you actually get errors and autocomplete and all that while you're authoring the markup. And it'd be even more powerful combined with TypeScript when you say import a component, and you can pass props, and if you are missing a prop, if the prop is of the correct type. So all of this combined has been a major drawback in a template-based development experience for Vue, right? So we have been making some really major improvements on this front. So in Vite, if you enable, say, the experimental interpolation services in Vite, now you can have type checking for imported props and error detection in your template expressions and all that. And Rahul has been doing a lot of interesting explorations in Vue.js, which takes the approach of introducing a TypeScript plugin, which you can then include in your TypeScript config, which essentially allows TypeScript to understand Vue files. Now, this would enable features, say, refactoring across single file components, right? When you refactor a symbol, it will actually just work across TS files and single file components, or not to mention, type checking for expressions and all that. And then we're also seeing a new extension called Volar, which is unfortunately currently mutually exclusive with Vite, but Volar is essentially a different take on how the template and TypeScript support can be achieved via a VS Code extension, and it works extremely well. And it also has support for these experimental syntax like script setup. So if you're using script setup with TypeScript, it is definitely recommended to give Volar a try. But at the same time, while we are having all these great improvements and explorations, we realize the problem is for the user, right? The experience can be a bit fragmented and confusing. So if you're starting a new project, now you have to decide which extension to use, or whether I should go with the VS Code extension path or go with the TypeScript plugin path, and how can I get the best of all of these tools together without having to configure them individually, right? So this is a problem that we are aware of. Again, as I talked about, we have made these kind of branch out explorations to find what is possible, to find what can be done. And now I believe it's time for us to sort of consolidate these efforts and figure out how to get the benefits of all these explorations, but present it in a cohesive manner, so that it feels more like a streamlined experience instead of just go and find what suits your needs, right? So this is going to be a big focus for us next in the IDE support department. And also, we are well aware that currently these IDE explorations are heavily VS Code focused, but in fact, a lot of these are either purely TypeScript plugin based or language service based. So there are a lot of these, once validated, can be extracted and reusable in other IDEs or editor systems as well. So this not all of this is coupled to VS Code. And then another major aspect of this is we want to provide a CLI tool for validating single file components along with TS. Now, Vite has a VTI tool, which surfaces Vite intelligence or diagnostics from the command line. VDS also has a type check utility, but again, we want to invest more time in making these stable, find the best way to achieve it, and then present it as an official solution to complement the IDE TypeScript support. Okay, so a lot of these explorations, and that's for the future, right? But in the meanwhile, there are some more urgent work that we want to focus on as well. So Vue 3 is currently at close to 680,000. I believe that's around 0.7 million. So that is to say around maybe 8% of all Vue apps now are on Vue 3. Now, this is obviously understandable because we know users are still waiting on a lot of things. Mostly major ecosystem libraries need Vue 3 support. Right? This is probably a hard blocker for a lot of existing apps. Now, we also want to give users a better migration path. We promised this last year, and we were hoping to ship it in Q1. Obviously, we spent a bit more time than expected on the build tool exploration, on the build tool explorations, which I personally believe is worth it if you've tried Vite. But that said, now we are shifting our focus back onto Vue 3. And yes, the next big focus will be the migration between 2 and 3. We want to figure out what's the best way for people to migrate, or figure out what's the best way to get the benefits of Vue 3, maybe without migration, and figure out what's the best way to keep the whole framework ecosystem moving forward with the given fact that Vue 2 is here to stay, and the two major versions will coexist, right? So 2 to 3 migration will be the main focus coming next of first half of 2021. And there could be, so as we've mentioned in the past, there will be a migration build with runtime compatibilities for some of the Vue 2 specific runtime behavior. There will be code mods that can attempt to automatically convert Vue 2 API usage into Vue 3 compatible code. Now, we also realize this will probably only work for apps that are small to medium scale apps, because if you have a large app that has really deep dependency on some Vue 2 specific internal behavior, then it could be a pretty tricky process. But that said, the goal of this migration tool built both the runtime compatibility layer and the static analysis code mods. Our goal is to allow small to medium scale apps to be able to migrate to Vue 3. And we also acknowledge the fact that there will be a lot of apps that will be on Vue 2 for a relatively long time. So I want to point out for if you have a large app that is working well with Vue 2 and you're not seeing major performance issues, then staying on Vue 2 may actually be a more economic option, right? So, but at the same time, we want to give applications that stay on Vue 2 exposure to the new features in Vue 3. Mostly the composition API-based utilities, right? So a lot of new libraries like Vue Use or Vue Composable. We are seeing a lot of these new utility libraries that can ship reusable logic for Vue applications. And Anthony Fu, who's now a core team member, has figured out a smart way to allow users to reuse composition API logic that supports both Vue 2 and Vue 3 via Vue Demi, right? So we want to keep this, we want to empower this approach more. We want to provide guidance and best practices for library authors to figure out ways to ship libraries that would work equally well for Vue 2 and Vue 3. Now, this is obviously not going to cover all possible library cases, but we believe, particularly for composition API usage, there is a sweet spot where we can encourage the ecosystem to make this to make a lot of these composition API-based libraries compatible with both versions with enough guidance and documentation on our part. And finally, there's so in yesterday's discussion, we had the Vue Contributors Day where we had library authors, users, active users, and core team members. We sat together and talked about a lot of issues. And one of the things that came up is the legacy browser support. Now, I know we've promised in the past that Vue 3 will have IE11 support, but we've kind of deprioritized it over time because there are still a lot of other things to be done, and Vue 2 is working pretty well for IE11. Now, if we take a look at this problem again, there's Microsoft between the time we decided that we are going to support IE11 for Vue 3 and the time to now, Microsoft's stance on IE11 also kind of changed with the introduction of the new Edge, right? So we realized if you are building an application for end consumers today, the majority of them will, in fact, be on modern browsers. And we also understand for a lot of enterprise users, for users who have to support IE11, the problem isn't really that about the general market share of IE11, but rather there are specific target audience that are stuck on legacy hardwares or company policies that forces them to have to use IE11, right? So when we think about that, one potential alternative path that was raised in yesterday's discussion was to focus on improving Vue 2 and backporting compatible features from Vue 3 so that Vue 2 can continue to support IE11 and Vue 2 users can get more benefits from the new features backported from Vue 3 instead of further widening the maintenance surface for Vue 3 with IE11. And at the same time, since the whole premise of Vue 3 was to embrace the new baseline for modern JavaScript, modern language features, we feel like there is a certain level of responsibility for a major framework like Vue Vue to push the ecosystem forward by, trying to help the phasing out of IE 11. Now, I want to emphasize that this is a point raised in yesterday's discussions and is totally tentative, right? We will not make this kind of decision without first discussing and soliciting feedback from the community. So we will write up a more comprehensive document, a more comprehensive RFC detailing the pros and cons of different approaches. And we want to open this discussion with the community to see where we should be headed next. But at the very minimum, we believe this is something that's worth discussing, and we want to see what we want to hear more about the overall community at this very time, at this point of time, because we believe the overall share and support range of IE11 has been rapidly changing over the past few months. So we kind of want to reevaluate the whole situation to see what's the best path forward. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very much. And I think we can now go into the Q&A session.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Evan, for that presentation. I think that, the chat here, both in the YouTube feed and in our Hopin main stage, is exploding with questions and impressions from Vite. I want to maybe pass the mic now to Maria to see if you have any comments or questions that you see from the audience.
Yeah, so there was one question from the audience. So somebody said that currently the docs do tell you how to deploy on Docker, but not how to develop with something like Docker Desktop or Docker Compose. Are you working on a Docker development with Vue CLI or Vite?
Honestly, not really, because it kind of depends on what kind of issues you're running into. We typically consider the specific network environment of the dev server to be it's tricky because it's very, setup dependent. It's hard to come up with a very generic solution for this kind of scenario. So I think, and personally, because I don't do most of my development under Docker, so it could be, just here, it could be really hard for me to give you a definitive answer for that. So if you think that our major shortcomings or roadblocks in using Vite or VCI and Docker-based environment, I think you should open an issue and get more feedback from the community to see if other people are sharing the same problem. Given enough voice, we will probably consider if we should have dedicated special handling for such scenarios.
Thanks, Evan. Gip, do you have any questions? Oh, I think you're muted.
I think Gift is muted.
Oh, fixed. Yeah, I have one question from the audience, and they're asking, when are we going to have a stable version of Vue 3 DevTools?
Okay, so this will, I hope Guillaume hears this question because he's the one mostly working on the next version of the DevTools. And I also realize we still don't have Vuex integration in the new DevTools yet, which I personally hope we can get it soon. Unfortunately, I have too many other things to focus on, but yes, I am eagerly waiting for it too. So Guillaume, come on.
Speaking of other things to focus on, there was some comment in the chat there that are you planning on going into cars now and fixing more other things, because having your framework power things that go into Mars is a pretty nice brag. Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you.
There was a question about full stack Vue, right? There is this conception that, and I remember during the release of Vue 3, I had a similar question. Vue 3 and it's the coupled model essentially could be used for server-side applications as well, or maybe to power some file system operations, as Anthony put an example together. Do you see this being a thing more in the future, maybe writing some backend code with Vue itself?
To be honest, I still consider Vue to be very focused on user interfaces. The reactivity paradigm itself is indeed use case agnostic. So, but the reactivity system is just a part of Vue, right? Vue as a whole is still a UI framework. It is meant for developing user interfaces. Um, so I'm not sure if the original question, has anything to do with React Server components, but specifically for Vue, I think the reactivity module, yes, like I'm excited to see people using it in a non-user interface use cases. I think that's interesting, uh, but Vue as a framework, the focus is still going to be user interfaces.
Wonderful. Maria? Thank you, Evan.
Yeah. What can we expect from i11 compatibility with Vue 3, and which features will not be supported?
So this is something we were just discussing at the end of the talk. Um, so if we were to support, so in the original technical plan that we outlined to support IE11, the main part that's not going to be supported is just the new property detection. Um, because that's a hard reliance on proxies. There's no way to detect it in IE11. So you can't expect to add a new property. You also cannot mutate an array by setting indices, uh, because that's also not detectable. So essentially, the other reactivity caveats that we are sort of familiar with in Vue 2, if we were to support IE11, those caveats will just have to be kept. But other than that, I don't think there is hard reliance. There are other I don't think there are other features that are like absolutely cannot. It's just a question of the complexity of internal implementations. But again, we will likely open a new discussion or RFC discussion regarding the best path forward about IE11. And I think it's worth rethinking the strategy, rethinking like what's the best outcome, given given the limited bandwidth and the resources for people to first the resources from the team to maintain this sort of legacy burden, and also considering what would be the best case scenario for users currently have to support IE11 and already having an application working well in IE11 on Vue 2, right? There are just a lot of trade-offs that we need to reconsider.
Right. Thanks, Evan.
Well, there was a question right now. By the way, Guillaume is actually answering and sort of live tweeting, but in our hoping stage. So he actually gave an additional compliment to your answer, Evan. We have a question about rollup. Like, well, we know Vue was originally also the code base using rollup. Is that the reason why you chose to use it in Vite, or did you give any consideration of the fact that Webpack has now federated modules and this new whole way of approaching distributed code bases? Is that something coming into Vite?
So yeah, so here's the idea. So for Vite, we were looking for a bundler solution that with a relatively straightforward plugin architecture, so that it can be easily replicated in a dev server environment without actually running the bundler itself. And Rollup's plugin interface is really well designed and straightforward. So we were able to actually do that. At the same time, because Vite is a ESM first development build tool, it's pretty opinionated. It encourages you to only use ES modules in your own source code. And Rollup is so when Rollup came out, it was a bundler that was only handled ES modules by default. So, which actually allows it to, in the sense that because it is ESM first, it is slightly more efficient in terms of producing bundle, better tree shake, in terms of tree shaking and all that. And it's also lighter weight, but still has all the necessary features for us to build a production grade app. So there are a lot of obviously there are a lot of different trade-offs. Like for Webpack, federated modules is something that a lot of people are looking into. But personally, I think federated modules is a on the whole scale of things, it's a pretty niche feature. Um, it is only valuable if you have pretty specific runtime requirements, and it's pretty tricky to get right. It's not something you can just say I'm going to use it today and just get it set up instantly. um, so and from what I heard, also from what I understand, a lot of the use cases with federated modules is for running this sort of micro front ends, being able to sort of have multiple separated built application running in the same environment. But there are also other ways to achieve that without relying on federated modules, right? But that said, federated modules is not really something that is Webpack only, right? It's a generic strategy for bundling and federating modules, right? So I don't think it's impossible for this to be, replicated in other bundlers. So I don't think, using rollup instead of Webpack means we will never have some similar feature in Vite. And on the other hand, right, Vite is although Vite's whole architecture is pretty centered on rollup, there are interesting ways to actually say only because the rollup plugin architecture is in the sense that it separates the module transform phase and the bundling phase. So, which is what allows us to run only the transform phase in the dev server in the first place. So we can do the same thing when we're building. We can say only apply the module transform parts for the modules. Then we just write them to disk. And now you can use Webpack to bundle them. So this is the strategy that Snowpack's been using. And although we opted to go a more opinionated route, it doesn't mean we can't just, in the future, if it turns out module federation is going to be a very, very popular thing, then we can sort of dial it back and figure out how to support it by, allowing alternative bundlers. And in fact, I think there are already some users who figured out how to use Vite only as a dev server and then bundle the code using Vite CLI. So there are a lot of interesting, different ways to tackle this. But in the short term, module federation is not something you can do with Vite. That's just how it is.
A masterclass in system design and how flexible this is. Gift, do you have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, sure. I have one. This question is asking, are there any plans to provide better documentation on the internal renderer in Vue, and also how to create a custom renderer in Vue?
Yes, this is something I wished I should. I wish I could spend more time on. There are already some. So for now, the best way to figure it out is probably look at how the runtime DOM is implemented. So basically, you have to read the source code, and I understand that may not be the easiest thing to do if you are not already familiar with Vue internals and TypeScript and all that. But this is a really advanced feature, and it's really niche. So the challenge here is if we only write a really introductory level guide for it, you won't actually be able to build something that's going to be working in production. Right? It involves more than just using the API. You kind of need to understand how the whole thing works together. So it requires some more in-depth writing, which I hope I can get to. We now have a new blog, and I do plan to write a bit more about Vue internals on it. So I'll keep that in mind. Yes.
Great, thanks.
Evan, do you have an idea when Vuetify will be ready for Vue 3?
Well, you have to ask John later. I believe he's going to be talking about it. No?
I believe so.
We have a question, Evan. So Richard Harris mentioned the concept of a hybrid framework that has some parts being server-side rendered, server-side generated for others.
Mm-hmm.
React has the concept of incremental server-side generated and server-side rendering. Is something like that maybe in the pipeline as well for Vite?
For Vite or for Vue?
For I guess for both, of course.
Or both? I mean, so I believe it is. If you are you say using Vite with React, it should be technically possible to get React server components running with Vite. Uh, Although I'm obviously I'm not sure because their demo runs on Express, so technically it should be able to run in any Node.js server given enough integration. But on the topic of whether Vue would do something like that, so I think that that's an interesting question because when we evaluate whether it is worth doing something, we kind of have to look at the trade-offs, right? So I think the major uh, cons I see with React Server Components is that it couples you to this very specific server-side setup, um, which is also pretty complicated to get right. So I don't think normal users would be able to easily set it up without a meta framework already packaging it for you, right? Um, at the same time, if we look at the benefits that it provides, there are multiple aspects of this. And one of the things that the React team is trying to use as the major selling point is it allows you to reduce the bundle size. Say a component, if it only runs on the server, then its code won't even need to be shipped to the client. But then you are also incurring this. So you're incurring both the server setup complexity, and you also have an overtime that any update, client update that involves any server-side component now has to do a server round trip uh, to get updates onto to the client, right? So there are a lot of interesting problems I believe are not completely solved in the paradigm yet. It's an interesting exploration, right? But if we look at the cons and the pros, so my typical approach is thinking if is it possible for us to get the pros without paying some of the cons, right? And I believe there are ways in Vue to do something, that obviously we're not going to get all the things that server-side components provides, but one of the major benefits that is, say, reducing the duplicated payload, reducing the client payload size and the hydration cost and all that. A lot of that we can in fact achieve by more compiler optimizations because Vue has templates and we're now a very heavy compiler heavy framework. So some of the things we've been doing in VitePress, for example, allows us to compile Markdown as Vue components and automatically throws away all the static parts in the JS payload. And only selectively include the embedded components, the dynamic bits embedded in Markdown. And also, we skip all the hydration of the static parts, only hydrate the dynamic components, right? So obviously, VitePress currently only works for a very specific case that is largely static Markdown compiled, maybe embedding some components in between. But for that specific use case, we already get the benefit that server-side components is trying to achieve without being super intrusive, right? And some of the explorations we are planning to do in, say, 3.1 or 3.2 is to extend this use case beyond just static Markdown. Like we can provide compile time hints that let you say, it's similar to designating a component as a server component, right? But you can say this component, this part of the template will only be dynamically evaluated on the server and will never be evaluated. So the data never changes on the client. So, and when we are doing server-side rendering or doing, say, static-side generation, we do the same thing on when we're building the site, generating the site, but on the client, when we're compiling the template for the client, now we have the information knowing, okay, this part of the template can just be considered purely static for the client. And we just generate different code for that, right? So this is something I've been playing with. It involves some pretty intensive, internal refactors, which is why it's kind of still in the backlog. But I believe this is a very promising direction, and it allows us to essentially get a lot of the benefits that essentially, if you know something that's going to only be dynamic on the server, why ship it to the client? But also doesn't couple you to a specific server, right? You don't even need a server to get this benefit. It would work in static site generation as well.
Exciting things to come. Thank you, Evan. Maria, do you have a question?
I have a lighthearted question for you. So, Evan, when the world opens back up, what is the first restaurant you'll go to?
Oh, that's a hard question. Honestly, I don't know. There are a lot of that's really hard. Probably
How
just
about a cuisine type or something?
yeah. I think it's probably gonna just be with family to a restaurant nearby. But I really miss traveling around the world. You know, when you go to a new city, find the best restaurant out there and just try it out. I really hope, maybe in a year or so we can get back to normal. That's just this past year has been really brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, I work remotely already, but it's still brutal. Like I can't even go out to public places. It's tough.
Next year, we'll all be trying a new place in Amsterdam.
Yes, please. Yes.
Nice. I have a question, and
Yeah.
this is asking, when you started, did you ever think that so much of development time would be spent in tooling more than the framework itself?
Obviously not, but when I first started, the I guess the sense of how much the framework should do and how much I should do always kind of changes over time. Like I never thought I would be writing a router when I started Vue. I never thought I'd be writing a state management tool or a DevTools extension. All of these things kind of just fell onto my plate naturally. And I'm also glad that, over time, members of the community stood up and then took things off my plate, right? I'm really appreciative for people who kind of, just helped me to, share this burden. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. I think that's just that's a pretty cool thing about open source is just you kind of grow with the project, things fall onto your plate, then people take it off your plate, and the project grows in this process.
Putting it out for the world. There's one last question. I think it would be very nice to ask you, Evan, from your art background as well, and your time at Google Creative Lab. It seems that a lot of Vue's own evolution is based on experiments. You have script set up right now. You have variable injection. Are there any other experiments you have going on? And do you think that art background is kind of always trying to just shine a bit through the work you do for Vue and Vite?
Well, a lot of these, I have a super long backlog, to be honest. But ideas always kind of sometimes then when you see something eventually turn into an actual project, take Vite for example, right? The original idea came almost 2 years ago. A lot of these ideas, they start as just a random note drop down somewhere, and I don't know, it just there in the back of my head. Sometimes I'll maybe have an epiphany. I'll be like, wow, okay. Then I write it down into a more detailed, a little design note, like some pseudocode or maybe something like that. But it's still kind of in the drawer somewhere. And then one day, maybe when I'm on Twitter, I see, okay, there's this new thing in the browser now. Doesn't that unlock this previous idea that I had? Then I go back to that and I'm like, wow, this actually works now. Let's do it. That's kind of the process. It's more like, some of the ideas will inevitably be too difficult to pull off at the point of time. So, but at a future time, maybe something happens that unlocks it, and then I think it's a habit. I think designers do that too, right? You kind of have these inspirations. You have to write it down and keep in your precious design book so that when the opportunity arises, then you're like, oh, I've thought about this long time ago. Right?
That's really amazing to see the thought
Yeah.
process behind and how you're catching up with the platform and the projects out there to really ignite those projects. Evan, we would like to thank you once again for being part of
Thank
Vuejs
you.
Amsterdam 2021. We are always super proud to have you here, to be that you're part of our community, our events, and as you said, well, maybe next year we can all try a new place in Amsterdam. I would like to also thank Gift and Maria, who were instrumental in this Q&A now. And next, we're going to have in this same feed the results of the state of Vue, which was prepared by Monterail. And there are a lot of very interesting findings in how Vue is used, adoption rate of Vue 3, enterprise. Well, I just won't spoil it anymore. They're going to do it. And right after that, we have a panel discussion where we talked a bit about the future of Vue 3 as well and what we can expect as an industry. And well, awesome content coming your way. So thank you once again for being here. We will let you enjoy the rest of our program. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
We are going to do this again.
I think we're live still, so bye.
Hi everyone, my name is Peter Kirekdal, and I'll be presenting a portion of the State of Vue 2021 report by Monterail. Before we dive into the report, I'd like to quickly introduce ourselves and tell you about our relationship with Vue.js. We're a software development company located in Wrocław, Poland. Since Monterail was founded in 2010, it's grown to 110 plus team members who've delivered over 300 projects to more than 170 clients. More than just numbers, we also have our own unique company culture. Here we are during a bunch of integration events, and we'd like to take this moment to introduce ourselves and thank you for having us here to present for you. Our experience with Vue, even though it started well before 2017, is most notably marked by VueConf. We hosted VueConf. It was the first international Vue.js conference right here in Wrocław. We were joined by over 300 members of the Vue community to see 17 speakers give 16 talks for a total of 8 knowledge-packed hours. There were also workshops, 2 non-official before parties, and 1 official after party. Our first VueConf lives on in legend here at Monterail. Once we jumped in, Vue kind of attached itself to our daily lives and work culture. I mean, look at all the Vue emojis that we use on Slack. We even made Vue Brew, a Vue.js themed beer this year, to go along with the State of Vue report promotion. We also made a Vue beer for VueConf, so we're gaining some experience with the brewing. That brings us to the State of Vue 2021 report. This year, we had awesome expert contributors. You'll find a nice mix of people from outside and inside of the Vue.js core team. Working with the Vue community is really rewarding. Everyone was eager to share knowledge, experiences, and generally help out with the report. Hats off to all of you from the Monterail team, and thank you for helping us. The State of Vue Report 2021 is the 3rd edition, following up the 2017 and 2019 editions. We continue to create the report because we enjoy contributing to the Vue.js community. It also gives us the opportunity to stay in touch and monitor the growing popularity and progress of this framework that we use every day at Monterail. As Damien Dulish once said, Vue gave me the perfect opportunity to do something I've always dreamed of, to start giving back to the community. So, in that spirit, we're trying to continue down that same path. We conducted a survey with results from 1,635 people, mostly developers and CTOs from around the world, and asked them about their personal and organizational relationship with Vue.js. Most of the respondents were software developers from small teams in small and medium-sized businesses. We'd like to take a chance to thank all the organizations that helped us out by providing insights and case studies. Not only are you Vue supporters, but you all had very interesting goals and technical solutions. It was a pleasure to work with all of you, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. Speaking of case studies, this year we're also releasing, for the first time, the Vue for Business report. It's a strictly business-related Vue report including 7 case studies from companies around the world and other business-related info and data. Let's get back to the report and our massive survey and take a look at some of the key findings. In the survey, we asked people how long they've been using Vue in their organization. 41% responded that they'd been using it for over 2 years. This is a 39% increase from the same question in 2017. We can see that Vue is setting down roots as a long-term solution. And when it comes to organizations that adopted Vue less than 6 months ago, that number was 45% in 2017 and has dropped down to only 8% this year. Vue's documentation is legendary for being the best among modern frameworks. So it's no surprise that when we asked people how they continue to improve their knowledge of Vue, 93% responded it was the official documentation. Articles, blogs, and online communities followed as the most popular learning sources. It's great to see that the documentation maintained by the Vue team and the resources nurtured by the general Vue community continue to provide a strong learning resource. We continue to see projected growth in Vue's popularity. We asked people if they think more employees will be using Vue over the next 12 months. The majority told us yes. They do expect more people on Vue projects. These results are consistent with the results from 2017 as well as 2019. We asked a similar question, but this time we focused on upcoming Vue projects. What we saw was a strong majority of people who plan to use Vue in upcoming projects in their organization. We wanted to reach beyond our own survey results and gather even more data about Vue. So we decided to review over a dozen trusted sources and compared the results to previous years, as well as comparing Vue to other popular JavaScript frameworks. Here's a sample of what we found. Although Angular and React have stable positioning as the 2 most used frameworks, Vue.js has raised its rank by 1 position every year for the last 3 years. So let's keep our fingers crossed that in 2021 we can get that number 7 position. When we looked at the current internet landscape, we saw that Vue positions itself remarkably well. It has more live websites than Angular, and the ratio between live and live plus historical sites is the best in the comparison, meaning that projects that go online with Vue tend to stay alive longer. Thank you so much for listening to this part of the presentation. My colleague Artur Rosa will present more technical findings, and we also have a case study by Thomas Finlay to show how he decided to use Vue.js in his business and his experience with other frameworks. Thanks again.
Hi, I'm Artur Rosa. I'm web developer and front-end geek at Monterail. I'd like to show you some results from a bit more technical point of view. It's great that we got feedback from so many people using Vue. Thanks to this, we had the opportunity to find out not only why they use Vue, but also how they use it. I always try to use every opportunity to find the way other developers work. However, there is rarely the opportunity to talk to hundreds of them at once. Therefore, I couldn't wait for the results, and I'm very happy to share them with you. What's really great about Vue is that it is a very flexible framework. It's clearly seen in the answer to this question. We asked respondents which of the following use cases for Vue they had. Sure, the most common answer was that Vue controls the entire frontend in a single-page application. But we have to note that Vue is also used frequently for many different scenarios. It can add extra interactivity to a static site, it can enhance already existing apps and websites, it can control the entire frontend with server-side rendering, it can add extra interactivity to a backend application, It can also be used as a part of Jamstack architecture. As you can see, it hasn't changed much. Vue has been and still is used for many different use cases. We already know what we create. Now let's take a look at how we do it. Recently, we can observe a certain trend in the front-end world. More and more programmers are using TypeScript. This can be seen in the results of more general surveys, for example, State of JS. Our survey confirmed this trend also in the Vue community. As you can see, almost twice as many respondents use TypeScript in their projects. In our survey, we also asked a question: is there anything you are missing when it comes to Vue.js? And this year, a need for TypeScript support became a most popular answer to this question. What is great is that the core team is aware of this need. Vue 3 is written in TypeScript. This means there is no need for additional tooling to use TypeScript with Vue. I believe that also newly introduced Composition API will help with better TypeScript support. We asked our respondents about routing technology they use. Vue Router is by far the most used approach. Sometimes server-side routing is used. We also asked our respondents how they deal with a global state. Vuex is the most used approach here. Some projects had no global state, and some of them used simple solution with shared state on root component. Only a small number of respondents use other solutions. Again, the most used approach uses an official library, Vuex. You know, we are programmers. We love to implement custom solutions, and we love to reinvent the wheel. I think those results say one thing: those official tools solve real problems, and they are good at it. If they weren't, programmers weren't use them. We asked our respondents how much of CSS was global in their last Vue project. As you can see, less and less styles are global. We have to look at the next result to get the answer why this is happening. And well, here it is. The overwhelming majority of respondents used some CSS scoping strategy in their projects in the last year. Scoped attribute for Vue files was the most common approach. This and the previous result show a certain trend, in my opinion. The fewer global styles and better style encapsulation, the more Vue components are similar to web components. We asked another question: how did you create your last Vue project? And well, definitely fewer programmers write their own build configuration. More people started to use automated tools to create a project. The most popular is Vue CLI, followed by tools of Nuxt and Quasar. In my opinion, there is no surprise here. Vue CLI is a great tool that helps developers to focus on delivery. It's not just a simple tool for prototyping. More often, it's a sufficient tool to manage very complex applications. Looking at the survey results, I got the impression that the Vue community has found its way in how to write applications well. Despite the variety, it seems to me that some trends in the way of creating and developing applications grew stronger. As I showed at the beginning, Vue is used in very different scenarios, and even so, the official tools and recommended approaches seem to be used even more often. This may indicate a lot of things. However, it seems to me that it is worth focusing on two aspects. Official tools are getting more and more mature. These tools, just like Vue, are very flexible and can be successfully used in a variety of scenarios. The second aspect worth highlighting is the great documentation that not only consists of API reference, but also the guide, the style guide, example, the cookbook, and even a guide for writing Vue documentation. For more precise numbers and even more interesting statistics, as well as comparison with other popular frameworks, I strongly encourage you to see the full State of Vue.js report on Monterail's website. Thank you for the opportunity to present at Vuejs Amsterdam conference. We also have a case study with Thomas Finlay to show a more business perspective of the use of Vue.js. So stay tuned and thank you again.
Hey, I'm Thomas Finley. I'm going to present the case study of Finley WebTech and talk about our journey with Vue. First, let me tell you a bit about myself. I'm a full-stack web and mobile developer, mentor, consultant, and the author of Vue, The Road to Enterprise, which is an advanced book that covers both Vue 2 and Vue 3. So I've been coding for almost 9 years now, and since then I've had quite a few different jobs and freelance contracts before establishing Finley WebTech with my wife a few years ago. Finley WebTech is a consulting business that offers various software services such as web and mobile development, consulting, mentoring, project audits, and so on. Initially, it was established as a local digital agency based in Glasgow, but very soon we started to work with developers and teams all around the world. I want to share with you our experiences with multiple frameworks and how we ended up using Vue.js. So, back in the days, jQuery used to be a staple choice for any kind of a project, really, due to the fact that it offered a lot of methods for dealing with DOM, animations, API requests, and so on. It also ensured cross-browser compatibility, which was quite important in the past because not all browser vendors implemented APIs in the same way. Unfortunately, there were things jQuery wasn't well suited for, especially in larger applications that involved a lot of dynamic API-driven content. As applications grew, they became much harder to maintain and scale, and it was very easy to end up with a lot of imperative spaghetti code. Therefore, we decided to look for a new solution that we could use to create web applications. There were three frameworks that we considered: Vue, React, and Angular. Angular, well, it was quickly dropped because it had a lot of frequent major releases with breaking changes. And to be honest, no one wants to be outdated by a major version every 6 months or so. What's more, it offered less flexibility than Vue and React, and also it would force us to use TypeScript. And whilst TypeScript is a really great tool, especially for large applications with a lot of developers in a team, we didn't necessarily want to be forced to use it on every single project. Therefore, nowadays we use both React and Vue interchangeably. And to be honest, Vue is the more favorite framework, and we usually choose it for new projects, unless a client requires a different tech stack or there is some other particular reason why Vue wouldn't be the most suitable choice. Vue has solved a lot of problems and made a lot of things easier for us. First of all, less code has to be written as Vue abstracts DOM handling, and it also updates the DOM automatically whenever reactive state changes. Instead of writing a lot of imperative code, and now we write declarative, so it's much more readable and easier to follow. Vue also made it easier to create applications overall, as they're basically a combination of many small and large components that can be dropped in and composed where needed. Components also are great for encapsulating markup, styles, and business logic. Thanks to that, it's easier to manage and scale applications. And we can also share these components between many different projects, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. So it's very useful. Overall, there are many great things about Vue and the ecosystem around it. If I were to name a few things that we rely the most on, I think the top of the list would contain single file components, reactivity, and official libraries such as Vue CLI, Vue DevTools, Vue Router, and Vuex. With Vue CLI, we get a lot of great features such as hot module reloading, code transpilation, support for preprocessors, modern mode, and so on. Vue DevTools, on the other hand, are really great for tracking the state of components. They make the debugging process so much easier. Vue Router and Vuex as official libraries are an obvious choice for routing and global state management. To be honest, this isn't the case with React, for instance, because these choices were left up to the community. So if you're not using Redux, which is still quite popular, it might be quite a hassle to choose a global state management library, as there are plenty of them. Another thing worth mentioning, I believe, is the fact that Vue is a progressive framework. So basically, we don't need any additional tools to use it in a project because it can be added just via CDN link. I think this is really great for websites that require only a bit of interactivity, but also for legacy projects that need to be migrated. So there are a few ways in which Vue and the ecosystem helps us to save time and increase productivity. First, it's very easy to scaffold new projects with Vue CLI, so that definitely saves a lot of time, as we don't have to spend days on configuring and setting up Babel, Webpack, and other tools manually. Another useful thing is the fact that we can already use modern JavaScript in projects, as the code is transpiled to a format that is understood by all the browsers. The fact that Vue is so easy to learn and use is another great thing that saves a lot of time. So new developers don't need much time to get started with Vue, and they can start creating new features very quickly. So that's another great point. Other really nice things about Vue, I would say, are official documentation, which is very comprehensive, and a style guide that contains best and recommended practices for writing Vue components. A competitive advantage of using Vue is the fact that it allows us to develop fast and feature-rich applications in a much shorter period of time. Vue also has a very great ecosystem with large number of libraries. And thanks to that, if we need some kind of specific functionality, usually there's a package for it already. So we don't have to recreate all of it ourselves, but we can just install it and save a lot of time this way. What's more, throughout the last few years, the Vue core team managed to add new features to Vue without major breaking changes. And this is really great because our and our clients' applications do not require frequent major updates. So instead of wasting time on unnecessary updates and shuffling between different versions and documentations, we can focus on more important things. So there are two metrics that definitely did improve: the speed of developing applications and overall performance and loading times. Vue is extremely fast, and different techniques such as dynamic lazy loading, code splitting, and the previously mentioned modern mode help a lot with shipping only the code that a user needs at the time. A lot of our clients were really happy and satisfied with the applications that were developed with Vue, as they loaded very fast and provided great user experience. Vue 3 has been out already for quite some time. It has brought a lot of different enhancements such as improved performance, better TypeScript support, composition API, and more. For me personally, the most interesting feature is composition API. Besides working with Vue, I also work a lot with React, so I do know well how big of an impact hooks had when it comes to creation of shareable and reusable stateful logic. I can definitely say that Composition API is one of the biggest and most important features that Vue 3 brings to the table. We and some of our clients have already started to use Vue 3 in production, mainly on internal projects rather than user-facing though. The ecosystem still needs a bit more time to catch up. Many libraries and UI frameworks do not provide Vue 3 compatible version yet. However, if you were wondering if you can use Vue 3 in production, the answer is yes. Just make sure you won't need any specific library that isn't compatible yet. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Here are some links if you would like to get in touch with me. You can find me on CodeMentor, Twitter, and you can also check out findywebtech.com and theroadtoenterprise.com. Enjoy the rest of the conference and have a great day.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be part of this panel. What an amazing lineup that we have here. Well, this is, in a nutshell, it's going to be our State of Vue.js panel coming on the heels of the discussion that was presented during the report, the results of the report. I'm going to start by introducing our wonderful panelists here. I have, of course, our guest of honor, Evan Yu, creator of Vue.js, and other tools in the ecosystem like Vite and many others, VitePress. Tracy Lee, CEO of this.labs, Google developer expert and co-organizer of the Vue Contributor Day, which we're very happy to collaborate with. We have Puya Parsa, head of framework at Nuxt and a passionate people colleague of mine. Hi, Puya. We have Thomas Finley, author of Vue Road to the Enterprise, consultant and author. Nice to have you here. And last but definitely not least, we have Thomas Kanya Orcel, which is part CTO of Monterail and part of the team that brought the report of the State of Vue.js to life and what's making possible this conversation in a way. So thank you all for being here. I'm very happy to have you. I would like to start with a sort of icebreaker question, and I would like to go around the panel asking you, what is the first thing that comes into your mind when you think about Vue? And I would like to start with Tracy, if you could share with us.
Sure. I see a lot of growth. So that is the first thing that comes to my mind.
Wonderful. What about you, Evan?
For me, Vue is life.
That's really, really nice. What about Thomas Finley?
I mean, if it would be just about the words, it would be fast.
Fast.
To be nice.
Yeah. What about Puya?
Actually, I'm the same as Ivan. For me, it's also life because, like, for years, I was always working with Vue, and I can't imagine creating a website without Vue. So it's like for website development is Vue.
And Thomas, what
maybe it's silly, but it's Vue. So from this is something like a part of an application. So because I am a developer.
the Vue layer, let's say.
Yes, Vue layer.
Understood. I was a bit worried when you say maybe it's a bit silly. I was like, oh, is that the word? No, it's the Vue part. Wonderful. Well, we'll come back to your words in a moment as well. Thank you for sharing that with me. I would like to start the conversation with Evan. Last time we spoke in this same stage for Vue.js Global 2020, you shared with us the long-awaited announcement of Vue 3 entering GA stage. Since then, 6 months have passed. Many projects have moved and migrated as well. I would like to ask you, what are your impressions on the adoption rate so far, and maybe if you have some reactions, some impressions of the reactions of the developer community to that announcement.
Sure. So far, I think my general impression is a lot of greenfield projects are getting started directly with Vue 3 whenever possible. I think we are aware that there are a few things that prevent more people to getting on board, mostly legacy browser support. I know a lot of users still need to support IE11, so that's like a hard blocker for them. Another aspect of it is for people who have very large, complex Vue 2 code bases. We still haven't provided a very, I guess, painless migration path. Like if you want to do it manually, it's possible, but for a lot of people, it's still kind of difficult for people to figure it out on their own. So this is something we're still working on. But at the same time, I think we are, it's a challenge because we are essentially trying to manage two paths, which one is how Vue 3 itself can evolve and how we can bring the rest of the ecosystem up to date with it. And I think there will be a lot of exciting stuff coming in 2021. So we will definitely see more people to jump on board with the latest and coolest stuff.
We're definitely going to touch back on the migrating large code bases approach in a moment, but you touched on an important point. A lot of new projects are embracing the new release to try and just get the latest version out there already. And that also makes me wonder, for example, Puya, from your perspective, this must be a similar scenario for Nuxt users. What are your impressions there, or how is the community reacting to, expecting as well some Vue 3 support on the Nuxt side?
Actually, yes, it's quite a bit complex for us because as a meta framework, Nuxt has to provide legacy user support. Lots of users are already using Nuxt 2, and many users are excited about new features in the ecosystem, like Vite support, and where is Nuxt 3 coming, and where is Vue 3 support coming. And there's a mixed problem, like we have to support Webpack and we have to adapt with the new one. So the path that we are going is to split the Nuxt into smaller parts, like a separated CLI, like a new server-side rendering engine, which we can share them between different solutions. So we can adapt faster with these changes without breaking all other users.
It is in a way a mirror of what Vue itself did, right? Like adopting a monorepo strategy, breaking smaller parts that can open collaboration. I want to ask you something, Thomas Finley,
Yes.
From the enterprise perspective, right? You as being author on the road to enterprise, you may see also the reaction of some of these enterprise users to the introduction of Vue 3. Any insights you could give us on that?
So as far as what I can see, and also from the clients I work with, some of them already started to use Vue 3, however, mainly on their internal projects rather than user-facing ones. Because truth to be told, some libraries still need some time to catch up, UI frameworks, and so on. So yeah, mainly it is used on internal projects, to be honest. But also, just wanted to say, but also I can see the potential for growth in, using TypeScript with Vue 3, as a lot of our clients actually didn't use TypeScript with Vue. Most of them just use pure Vue, while now Vue 3 has much better support for TypeScript. So I imagine that this also will grow quite a lot.
That's one of the most interesting features, right? When discussing Vue 3, the improved support for TypeScript. And this also opens collaboration a lot, not only splitting that code, but only bringing support for TypeScript. And I wanted to ask you, Tracy, from the contributor perspective, as we're going to co-organizer of the Contributor Day, you have a big insight on what the community's feelings are towards the release of Vue 3 and the move of the ecosystem, what are some insights that you could share with us?
I think a lot of the things that we're seeing is we've been seeing a lot of enterprises wanting to adopt Vue, but just waiting for Vue 3, mainly for the TypeScript support. And so it was really exciting when that was finally released. I think it blocked a lot. It unblocked a lot for different enterprise people. We're also seeing a lot of people within the community, whether they be enterprise or startup, actually starting to use Vue for greenfield projects, which is really exciting. So Vue definitely seems to be the kind of like new exciting tech that people want to go to. You guys probably have also seen that Wikimedia announced last year that they were doing a Vue migration, and that's quite a large project as well. So I love seeing that. I think also within the community, we're trying to do this at this dot as well, is provide more content about the migration, about the upgrade path, because again, there's just not a lot of documentation around that. So it's nice to kind of see everybody be inspired by the growth and movement within the community and kind of rise up to the occasion.
Thank you for those insights. Thomas, I wanted to ask you from the perspective of Monterail as well, and preparing this State of Vue report. You have, quite deep experience in seeing the evolution of Vue as well, the Vue market in terms of how many developers out there are looking to get onboarded into Vue. For quite some time, Vue has been regarded as one of the friendliest frameworks to get started with. Have you seen any impact on the development market, or maybe on your experiences in Monterail, as what clients are looking for when trying to onboard developers into their projects? Is there a call for Vue 3? Is there a call for more Vue in general? How do you see that?
I think this is more complex, that we need to be something like a wider perspective, because our clients always think that the best solution is more stable. So they're thinking about past version of Vue, so 2.x. So this is when our client come to us, they have something like a current code base, and we started to working with that code base. And maybe the Vue 3 is a better solution for developers, but for the clients right now, it's started to change in the market, because maybe they need to change the type of thinking to switch to Vue 3, and our work will be easier, I think so.
Any comments on that part, Evan? For example, this is something we have seen in the past, this idea of, is this going to be the Angular 2 moment of Vue, right? Then,
well, I think in terms of adoption, the biggest, I guess, the illusion, a lot of perception about, say, I guess it's a kind of a versioning strategy problem, in the sense that when you have, because Vue don't really do these big breaking releases very often. So people tend to associate big new releases with risk. So I think we might want to do a bit more sort of demystifying for that, because a lot of people probably don't even look into what has really changed and what has stayed the same, right? If you actually look at the API, most of the changes are kind of minor. If you're migrating from an old code base, that might cause pain. But if you're just starting a new project, Vue 3 is like everything you can do with Vue 2, pretty much you can do. I guess the only thing people have been waiting on is IE11. If you don't need IE11, or you're waiting on some major UI component kits like Vuetify. Other than that, I don't really see strong reasons not to use Vue 3, just from a pure technical standpoint. But good news is we are seeing Quasar and Vuetify, these major UI component players. They are almost ready for their Vue 3 release. I think Quasar already released it. And once Nuxt has official Vue 3 support, I think it's time. Like, people will there's really not much blockers left for you to adopt Vue, especially for greenfield projects. Because I mean, outside of the just because it's a new version, right? I guess we've talked enough about the benefits. Vue 3 is just leaner, faster, better TypeScript support, and new features. So developers will definitely be more productive. And in fact, I would say Vue 3 is going to be more robust in a lot of aspects than Vue 3, just because how improved the internal architecture is.
There is one concept that we haven't touched on. The composition API is one of that other reasons that a lot of developers see, oh, Vue 3 means composition API, right? As if the syntax had radically changed, when of course this is not the case. You could use composition API before. And I want to maybe touch a bit on that, Thomas Findlay, if you could tell us, is the composition API something you saw making its way a bit into the enterprise world before Vue 3?
To be fair, in Vue 2, I wouldn't say so, especially considering the fact that even on NPM, the library mentions that it shouldn't be used in production. Okay. However, I can see it becoming very relevant in Vue 3. Because, to be honest, I work with both Vue and React on a daily basis, and I know how big of an impact React hooks had on the React world, basically, and how applications are created. And I expect Composition API to have a more similar impact because they make it so much easier to create basically shareable, reusable, stateful logic.
And but you haven't. That hasn't matched what you've seen in the wild, or you were expecting that. But what is what you've seen? Maybe if you could tell us.
So people are starting to adopt it, but what I've seen is that some are afraid of basically. So basically, some people are afraid that because of using Composition API, their code might be less readable and harder to maintain. Because, well, if you just start, putting refs, compute, and methods all together, then that's the truth. The code might become a bit too hard to read. But if you do it well and basically extract a specific logic into the separate composables, then it will be quite very useful.
Thomas touched a very interesting point, and I want to now go to our other Thomas to ask you again for the perspective of the developer community and the developer market out there. In a way, the introduction of the Composition API and the possibility of having this logical organization of your code seems to be very attractive for developers of other frameworks, more specifically React, as Thomas mentioned. Is that something you also see in your conversations with the members of the developer market?
Yep, I think so. It's a great advantage in a Vue Composition API. So this is something like a functional word in this front-end stuff that we are doing daily basis. So this is something like an organization of code, and this will be better for developers, I think so. And Thomas mentioned about hooks in React, and I think this is something like a bomb. So everything changes. And for a client's perspective, I think this is not much difference because everything is under the hood. So this is not changing so much for clients. But for developers, everything changes because you could organize your code with better logic. You could create more robust components. So this will be better, I think so. But the clients need to grow. And as I said before, they need to think about it, not a revolution, but evolution. And we try to convince the clients to change the projects to Vue 3 or start the Vue 3 projects. So this is our goal, to be on top of actualizations and updates.
And well, what better way of being on the actualization and update part than with the content, for example, that Tracy mentioned, she's seen more often to popping out, like the migration path and the transformation. Do you see maybe that the conversation is also going, Tracy, to there's less magic or less implicit magic in Vue? Because well, if you see the conversations, things used to be like, there's the magical this, right? What does it mean? And with Composition API, that the perception may have changed a bit. Is that also what you see on the developer community?
I mean, I wouldn't say specifically I'm seeing conversations move in that area. But I'll definitely say I feel like people are kind of solidifying their confidence in Vue, especially due to the innovation that Vue has been able to do. You know, having a lot of conversations with Evan before about kind of like roadmap of Vue and kind of why things are. I think one of the special things about Vue is that, you know, the team has been able to take concepts from all the different frameworks, figure out what's good and what's bad, and then implement it kind of after other people have tested it out in their communities. And I think that's something that's very special about Vue, and probably also why it makes Vue a very competitive framework as well.
The same kind of thing permeates all the way to projects in the ecosystem, right? It could be said major projects are also taking the lessons that other communities have learned and implementing their own things. And one such example, I think we could also tie into your work at Nuxt, Puya, how the composition API or this evolution that Tracy mentioned, how has that informed your own decisions in the Nuxt framework?
Exactly, I fully agree. Like the approach of picking the best from the ecosystem, it was inspired by Vue, and we are also using it here. For example, for image support, we was looking all around with other frameworks like Next.js, and for server-side render-only components, we was comparing our solution with them. So I think it's very nice that we are building on top of the best.
You touched the server-side rendering bit, which is also one of the most interesting parts of Vue 3. Vue 3 revamped essentially the server-side rendering part, which got it really closer to what Nuxt itself is doing. How does that? Are you plugging into that native Vue 3 mechanism now?
Well, actually, it's hard to answer because, as I mentioned, we are making tooling to support entire ecosystem, including Webpack 5 and also Vue 2. So actually, yes, it made job a lot easier. Like Vite support was like, I was expecting like a week, but I started like 1 hour in the night, it was done. So I mean, it made job much easier for us. We have to still keep supporting the rest, but I think it's like the Vue 3, it's making job lots easier for creating better frameworks.
I want to switch gears a bit because, well, you and I, we have many talks in the past about the future of the web and things that we're really passionate about. In the talks that have been taking part in JS World Conference and Vuejs Amsterdam, there are a lot of similar ideas around the evolution of where the web is going to take us. Without going too much detail into them, a couple of them have been the convergence of front-end and back-end software, for example, or how easy it is for front-end engineers to now become essentially full-stack developers thanks to the Jamstack and to many tools that allow them to do this. If you think, Puya, of Vue's role in this, and for example, what you guys do at Nuxt, where do you see the Vue's role in this evolution of the web being?
Well, I think the clear answer is the native module support with ESN module support. So the way I see Vue 3 is going to be more adaptive with native browser features that wasn't possible in past years. And this way we can have always the latest features without using polyfills and compromising performance for just supporting this. And the other thing is about full stack experience with meta frameworks, which I think is a really tricky answer because we had some experience with authentication module, which is basically integrating part of the backend of the authentication. And sometimes it was confusing because front-end developers wanted to integrate their authentication backend, and they had some challenges, and they couldn't find the problem because it was all mixed with the front-end. So I think it was a really tricky question. Anyway, we Next.js, we are supporting API routes similar to Next.js, but we have to see how people will respond, how they use it.
Well, I would like to maybe get some of your comments here on that, Evan, because talking about inspiration from other frameworks, there's like a larger conversation about things like server components from React Land, for example, is, or what gRPC is enabling developers to do with smart contracts and this seamless front-end, back-end code execution. Is that something you see in the roadmap of Vue?
To be honest, not in the short term, mostly because React Server Components is essentially greatly increasing the scope of what a framework is doing, right? This is essentially declaring that React is no longer a front-end framework. If you use React Server Components, your whole server paradigm needs to take that into account. And essentially, you can't just easily use this without some pretty dedicated server setup, which means it almost requires, a meta framework like Next.js to have it pre-baked in. But that also means you're kind of coupled to that specific framework or server setup. Personally, I wouldn't want Vue to sort of dictate what server you use to that extent. We somewhat already kind of require you to use Node.js, but I don't think we want to go further to saying, if you want to use Vue on the server side like this, you have to configure your server in a specific way. I just think it completely changes the scope of what you're, as a framework, what you're trying to facilitate. I think it's a bold move on the React side for them to venture into that, but for Vue, I think there are. So I tend to think of it from what actual benefits it brings, right? One of the big motivation for React team to do it is to reduce bundle size, because some of the components you don't actually need to ship to the client. But the difference is Vue has a compiler step, and there's a lot of stuff we can do there. There's a lot of potential that we haven't really even touched on. And I've been actually playing with some of it, and I'm pretty confident that there are going to be ways for Vue to say smartly figure out like this component when you use it, even though it's using all these dynamic bindings or directives, but you can say this only happens at pre-render time. So on the client, you can just treat it as a static piece of markup. And that mechanism Vue already has. In fact, if you use Vite press today, right, your whole markdown is compiled to a Vue template, but the Vue compiler already automatically extracts all the static parts and throw them away in the JS payload, right? So the infrastructure of a smart template compiler is already there. So there are definitely, so the challenge is actually just come up with a low intrusiveness API to achieve the same goal. So personally, I guess the goal of React Components, one of the goals of React Components, reducing the client payload and do as much work on the server as possible, I think can be achieved with a less intrusive and even cheaper way when you have a smart compiler step in frameworks like Vue. So that's my take. Right. Obviously, this probably doesn't cover all the things that React Server Components enables, but I just think these are different trade-offs, right? For a lot of people, having to be tied into a very specific server-side framework is a big commitment, right?
You encapsulated with that low intrusiveness API, and I think that is visible in the way that Vue has conducted. Thomas, well, you have an extensive background also in different frameworks and DevOps in the DevOps world as well, backend as CTO of Monterail. If you think about this philosophy that now we hear from Evan, this low intrusivity API where you're not necessarily binding users to work on a certain stack, how does that fare against what other tools or frameworks that you have that you see are being used out there, what they're doing? How does this fare with them?
I think this is very different for something like implementation, because when we are implementing one way, one product to use it as a CEO friendly, so for example, Nuxt or server-side rendering, I think this is something like point of this heaviness of the technology is put it on the server side. So you need to cover everything that you need to work on a server side. But when you're taking care of a front-end side, you need to follow with another philosophy. So I think when you are trying to know the front-end well, you need to think as a front-end developer, not a full-stack developer. Because when you're trying to dive into full-stackness, it's pointless, I think so. And when you need to know the DevOps and serverless and every key keyword that you know about infrastructure, it's a wide topic, and I think when you're trying to replace the application itself as a combination of front end and back end working in one code base, it's not efficient in a multiple scale. If you're thinking about enterprise, and I think this is something like we do in Monterail. So we try to optimize the front end and back end side. I don't know if I answered the question.
Absolutely. I think the insight on how this is different from the implementation level is an interesting one to address. I would like to, before we jump into that part, you also mentioned something about keeping in mind this separation, let's say, of how we approach these problems from a front-end or full stack perspective. And for that, I would like to ask Tracy, in your experience with all of the content that's around and all of the, the interest from the greater Vue community to contribute into the code base and to be part of the ecosystem, is there like a predominant front-end or predominant full-stack approach you are seeing in this content, and especially where is that moving? Do you see it doing more full stack or keeping in the front end side?
I think the role of the developer in the next 5 to 10 years is definitely going to be changing. So, was speaking to Guillermo of Vercel the other day, and generally I've been seeing so many of these like full stack frameworks being developed, right? Like Redwood and Blitz and a few others. So I think there's like definitely a place for that, right? But I think another thing I'm starting to see is the need for content for, DevOps for front-end developers, right? Because everybody kind of needs to know these types of things. And so it's going to be interesting whether, a framework or something like that kind of abstracts away the need for this whole like DevOps for front-end developers that we're seeing this year, or front-end developers are just going to need to understand DevOps in a more holistic way to be successful at their jobs. Who knows?
You touched an important point, that DevOps for front-end engineers, and I would like to reach out now to Thomas from the road of enterprise. Like DevOps is something that's already still permeating into the enterprise world, making its way. It's being adopted more widely, I think, than it was a couple of years ago, for sure. What's your outlook now if we are going to say front-end DevOps for front-end? Is that something that you have seen happen in the enterprise, this awareness of those, how the web works, right, from the front perspective?
So from what I've seen, I spotted that Jamstack applications are becoming more and more popular, especially with services like Vercel and Netlify. Because to be fair, if you know JavaScript, right, then you actually can write full stack applications, because basically you create front end in Vue, let's say, and then you can use serverless functions, right? And some other third-party services like OAuth, Contentful, and so on. So you don't even have to write your own backends, and then you have CI/CD provided by services like Vercel or Netlify. So this is becoming definitely more popular, that I can say.
That's very, very interesting to hear. And I have one. So the prevalence of the Jamstack has been really powered by these meta frameworks, right? Because you can build very complete applications using only a Vue CLI project, for example. But having these meta frameworks, as Tracy also mentioned, in many ways unlocks a lot of features that front-end developers are not necessarily thinking of, like server middlewares, router guards out of the box. What are some of the features you think that front-end developers really need to get more familiar with when coming to this perspective of DevOps for front-end?
Okay, well, I would say when it comes to actually having applications like that, I would say security, and also the fact that application can run in multiple environments. Because before, I see we would have clear separation between front end and back end, right? But the moment, especially with frameworks like nuxt.js, the code can run both on the server side and then on the client side, right? I also seen sometimes basic security issues where, let's say, environmental variables would be just dropped to the component because it was, just easy, or someone wasn't aware how it should be done, and voila, basically everything was on the client side. And that's a huge, big security risk. So I think that these two things, security and also where and how the code is running.
Puya, I would like to ask you if you have any comments on that side. For example, is Nuxt trying to improve this awareness of its own users on the foundational concepts that Nuxt is addressing for them? Maybe on the security side, maybe on the deployment side. Is that something the Nuxt team is concerned with?
Actually, that's true. For example, for preventing excess attacks or generating CSRF headers, if someone wants to do them manually, it's possible, but it's practically not. No one wants to do this because it's lots of trouble. So by making these things easier, it's easier to encourage people using best practices. Or for example, for generating responsive or optimized images. Like anyone can use an image optimizer, but when there is a tooling for that, it's encouraging them to use the newer technologies.
Well, it's just a world of opportunities that opening when I consider these elements. One thing that we have kind of mentioned adjacently here is support for IE11, right? And this also comes a lot from the targeting ES6 compliant browsers, right? If we target that, then support for IE11 kind of drops out. Evan, I would like to ask you now a more future-looking question. If you think about like support for ES7 compliant browsers in the future, right? Like how do you think, and is perhaps tools like Vite, is perhaps tools like Vite going to address these, concerns of the community to say, like, I want to only use the latest and greatest browsers. What is your outlook on that? Like, where do you think this is going to go?
I think that's pretty much Vite is trying to do, because compared to, say, most of the current major scaffolds like Create React App, Vue CLI, or even Next, the default take is always legacy first. Modern is like opt-in, but Vite is modern by default and legacy is opt-in. So when you use Vite, by default, you're targeting only browsers that natively support ES modules. And when you say opt-in, I want legacy support, what we are doing is we generate an extra, we basically run your code twice, build your code twice. Once is still the same modern build, the other one is targeting legacy browsers. Then we use this module no module trick to automatically load the right bundle based on browser support, right? So I think more tools should probably switch to this. Basically, we're just flipping it, right? Instead of legacy, modern is opt-in, now legacy is opt-in. I think that's a good step to encourage more people to think of the problem the other way around, because I believe the reason why we are able to get Vite to generate interest at this point of time is because we are finally at a time where, according to Jason Miller, author of Preact and WMR, 95% of mainstream browsers today already have a baseline ES 2015 support, right? So we're at a stage where we should seriously start thinking about modern first. And I mean, Microsoft has also officially basically taken a stance saying like you should stop using IE11. So as far as I know, the only reason people still need to support IE11 is because in some large organizations, it's just difficult to force people to update their software, and they're stuck with these old hardware with IE11, and they will never update the system. So for those systems, we probably just have to wait until they phase out, and that's going to take a longer time. But if you're building generic consumer targeting software, seriously, like, you should just consider modern first.
And that part that you touched about larger organizations having, that's definitely something we have seen as well. And Thomas, I would like to ask you maybe for comments on that. How do you see this this idea of modern first legacy opt-in being part of your work at Monterail, for example? Is that something you see, you feel clients could be open to?
I think this is something like the way that we trying to avoid, because when we are thinking about legacy software, and this is a more complex application that you think, and we try to propose the clients the way to escape from this very miserable situation. Because when you are stacking with a legacy code and legacy applications, legacy software, legacy environments, this is something like a break for future involvement or maybe a developer experience. And I think we propose something like something like a trick. And of course, we can't avoid using a different browser than IE11, but we try to avoid with something like a legacy code. So we create separate environments like reverse proxies or others, something like that. So this is one way. Another way to handle these legacy situations, we have big clients, and big clients were aware with something like updates the workstations. So this is the future. So I think we are something like experts, and we try to convince the clients to be on a better paths than before.
It's kind of our job as well to do that organizational push. I can totally see that.
And as Evan said before, Microsoft tried to avoid this problem with Internet Explorer and switch to Edge. So, and Edge with WebKit. So this is very, very good situation.
Exciting times are ahead. We are nearing the end of the time that we had for the panel. So I would like to ask you, and in a way, maybe echoing that first conversation when we opened, by now asking you again, what comes to mind when you think about Vue with the concept and with the context of this conversation? And I would like to start again with Tracy. You said growth. Is that still the feeling that you get from Vue when you think about what we just discussed today?
Yes, absolutely, right? Like, generally speaking, right, we're building the web for the next 5 or 10 years. And, just with all the innovation, again, that we're seeing within the Vue ecosystem and the greater JavaScript ecosystem, it's just going to be really, really interesting to see how our roles change as developers. And I think the best thing we can do from a growth perspective is the things that you guys are talking about, is educating people. So not only, general developers, but also as consultants, like educating our clients on, hey, you know what, this is the new path, right? This whole what's the digital transformation, right? Like the digital transformation that's going on right now. Yeah. But the enterprise stuff is definitely difficult because, again, even for some of our clients, you look at them wanting to upgrade, them, deprecating their software, right, or not supporting, XYZ, released from 5 years ago, and that permeates into like super non-technical organizations that are using things who, again, will just like never upgrade. So what do you do with that situation?
making the way, but the growth is still something that you see and hope for Vue, and that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
Evan, Vue is live. I cannot ask you if it changed because I don't imagine that changing, but what are maybe some of the impressions that you get after having this conversation?
I think we definitely there's still a lot of work to do, especially in terms of bridging this connection between current Vue 2 projects and Vue 3. I think that's going to be our focus for the next few months, and expects to see some major improvements on that front.
Wonderful. And well, there were many talks as part of Vuejs Amsterdam to cover that. I'm pretty sure there are quite nice updates being mentioned there. Puya, you also mentioned live. What are your impressions? Maybe has that changed? Is there a new word you could use to describe when you think about Vue?
Well, actually, my honest impression is that for me, React developers was always more advanced developers because there was more JavaScript developers and Vue.js was more beginner friendly. But I see that now we are going to a point that it's a mixed environment. So we have both beginner friendly and we are opening possibilities for advanced developers. So I think it's something exciting.
The convergence towards more power users in a way.
Exactly.
Nice. Thomas, you mentioned fast. Is that still the impression?
So actually, I have other words. I would say growth, as Trace already mentioned, and expansion. Because to be honest, well, in the past, from time to time, I've seen people saying that Vue is great, let's say, for small and to medium applications, but if you have a large-scale project, then use React. This is totally incorrect. Vue 2 is already enterprise ready, and with Vue 3 and Composition API, even more. And as for expansion, so it's not only about adoption on the website, but also a mobile site. For instance, recently Ionic released Ionic Vue, which is based on Vue 3. Now, NativeScript also is, from what I've seen, adapting some capacitor features, and Vue 3 now has basically renderer exposed. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of tools and new projects will be developed with it, not only for web, but also for mobile devices.
So it's the reaching out to other devices, other technologies that Vue may be adapted for. That's a nice outlook, and well, definitely looking forward to seeing how that's going to go. And Thomas, you also you mentioned the Vue layer, right? Have the conversation points that we had today maybe make you think that Vue is expanding, as Thomas just mentioned it, outside that Vue layer? What are your impressions there?
Right now, I need to change my mind, and I think the modern is the best explanation for Vue. And as I see, Ivan has in mind something like a modern first, and I think this is the right way to do it.
Wonderful. It's great to hear the convergence of points of view like this. Well, we sadly have reached out the remaining time that we had for the panel. I'm sure we could go on for hours on end, but I would like to go around the panel as well and now ask you, where can we read more about your work? Where can we get in touch with you? I would like to start with Tracy again. Where can we read more about this.media, the Contributor Day, and we'll read about you?
Sure, yeah, we have a lot of really fun events planned for the year. If you go to vuemeetup.com, you'll see all of them. We have Vue Contributor Days in collaboration with Vue Amsterdam next week, or well, now
week.
actually this. Sorry, and we also have State of Vue.js, and we'll be talking about a lot of ecosystem projects, and we're super excited to just get Vue kind of in front of the developers, in front of the executives that subscribe to our newsletters, and get more of that modern expansion going.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Tracy. Evan, where can we read more about what you're up to? What new tool you're going to be releasing next?
Just follow me on Twitter. I randomly tweet about new stuff I work on. Obviously, also follow the official Twitter accounts for Vue.js and Vite. We have other people managing those, so there will be more updates specific to those tools. Also, if you want to get really actively involved, we have Discord servers where you can jump in with other enthusiastic users. so you can, get more involved with the community.
Nice. That's was healthy community to join for sure. Thomas, where can we hear more about you? Maybe read more about your book. Is a Vue 3 version on the way?
Actually, Vue 2 Enterprise covers both Vue 2 and Vue 3. So the book is available at theroadtoenterprise.com. We also have a website, findleywebtech.com. And besides that, I think on both websites, there are links to my Code Mentor and Twitter profiles. So yeah, that's how.
Wonderful. And there's a case study on Findlay Tech in the state of Vue.js. So if you're reading that, then it's also a perfect place to read more about your work and what you've done with Vue. Puya, where can we learn more about what you're up to? Because you're an extremely busy guy as well and working on a lot of things, always exciting. Where can we find you in the web?
Well, actually, you're probably better to follow Sebastian Shopping and Nuxt.js official page because I'm more in the back. Yeah. So you can send me in GitHub, open and usually answer.
Well, from time to time, we see some mention of Puya Parsa there, and it's quality. And Thomas, where can we learn more about not only you, but about Monterail and about this wonderful effort of the state of Vue?
We have websites, monterail.com. So this is a first place to start. And we have a Twitter account, I think so. And a LinkedIn page, so we could reach from other sites. So I think the Monterail.com
is the place to go to start. Yeah. Perfect. And we can find the state of Vue there as well from navigating on the site.
Yep.
The report. Wonderful. Well, thank you all again for being here today. It was such an exciting lineup. I cannot thank you enough for being here and for the great input you gave. I hope the members of our audience found it as interesting as I did, because I'm so excited about the future of Vue after hearing you talk about this. And I hope we have an opportunity to be in person in one future conference, maybe next year, maybe later this year, hopefully. But for the time being, I thank you all for being here, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.